Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast, where we talk about real leadership with real stories by real people with solutions, and where we don't accept excuses. Today's guest has got an incredible story. He's not your typical wellness coach. He's a former chief operating officer who led hundreds of emotionally charged, high stakes conversations at Jarrett Companies before he walked away to start teaching what actually rewired his own life. He now runs Learn to Love Being You, a program focused on subconscious reprogramming and emotional rewiring. And not the fluffy stuff that you normally hear about, but the mechanical tools that actually change how your brain works. And the cool thing about what he does is that he teaches this everywhere from executive boardrooms to maximum security prisons. And he'll be the first one to tell you that if the method works with inmates facing life sentences, it can surely work with anxious professionals drowning in their own thoughts. Welcome, Mike Wood, to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. And man, we're going to have an incredible conversation, starting with how did you walk away from that COO, fast-paced, high adrenaline world of business into helping people rewire their minds?
Well, once I lived a life full of anxiety and depression for years at a level that, I didn't, honestly, I didn't want to be here anymore. I was walked right up to that line. And when you get to the other side of that and you find yourself wanting to live to 200 years old, all of a sudden you just want to help everyone. It's just like a natural response to finding something amazing. You just want to share it with everybody. And that's as simple as it gets. Experiencing pain and then experiencing life now in a way that is amazing. I just want to share it with everybody. So that's the natural transition. But I do want to say this, Pat. You are doing an amazing thing here on this show. You are spreading light and love to people who are in service of others that get forgotten about from time to time. They get taken for granted. And the work you're doing here is truly amazing. And I want all your listeners to get on your show, wherever you're listening, leave a 5-star review. I did it today before I got on your show, just because when I was listening to your show, it's just inspired me. And everybody needs to do the same thing. More people need to be hearing what you have to say on your shows. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you. So what was that moment that made you walk away and on the journey you're on now?
So the moment was, when I had achieved everything in life that I thought was going to make me happy, making the money, got the right job, got the right woman, you got, healthy family, you got a big house, you got everything. And then at the same time, I was more miserable than anything, than in any other moment in my life. It had crescendoed, like I was truly miserable. And at the end of the day, um, when I did turn my focus inward and I stopped focusing on the outside to try to fix my problems, and you said it really well in your introduction, stop making excuses. Because when we take ownership of what's happening on the inside, man, it changes everything. Now all of a sudden, when you take ownership, you actually have something to look at where you can actually make progress. You can make changes. But if you try to change the world, it's not going to move for you. But when you start making changes, incremental changes to what you can control, everything starts to move in a beautiful way.
Now, share some insights, because I've already started taking notes, and it's like I always tell everybody I'm that Irish setter that's in the backyard and a squirrel goes running by and boom, something. So when I'm doing podcasts, it's like, oh man, that was a great thought, and it triggered something for me. The squirrel running across. Give us some of your insights. And we'll actually get into the mechanical tool of the rewiring. But how do we balance or don't fall in the trap of the fine line between your ego in a negative way and that decision, intentional decision of I'm going to take control of my life?
That's a great question, because I think the answer to that is awareness. Having the awareness that you're running on autopilot 95% of your days. And this isn't me guessing, this is neuroscience, this is studies backed up that basically say we run 95% of our days on autopilot. And to stop and be aware of what's actually happening around you, within you, and not just voluntarily, involuntarily respond to things. When we bring awareness to it, that's when we can actually make a change. Because, like, I'm fasting again. Like, I love to fast, and I learned very early on when I would fast that I was hungry mentally, but my stomach wasn't actually hungry. I was eating because I was on a program. And I drive 45 minutes to and from work, and I'll drive home and I won't even remember driving home, but I didn't drive home unsafe. It's a program, right? And so if I'm talking on the phone, I'm listening to a podcast, I'm doing whatever, but I didn't drive unsafe. We are subconsciously capable of walking, talking, our heart beats without our help. We breathe without our help. We do virtually 95% of everything in this life on autopilot. We train ourselves how to do something, and then we move. And I think that is the biggest thing that we need to understand. So when you start talking about how you're processing your thoughts and them causing you pain, bringing awareness to what's actually happening with your thoughts, that's a huge deal. Because once you have the awareness that you're having these negative thoughts, you can start to change them. You can start to take action, and you take some tools and do something with them to change what's actually happening.
It's kind of this is a little bit interesting because I've been working on a TED talk or TEDx talk, and it falls kind of right in line with this. Is that we have the data's out there, roughly 50,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative, and that we have conditioned ourselves to have emotion driven reactions to challenges, obstacles, and even opportunities. And and we all know this. What is it? Fight, flight, or freeze. And that's how I think when you say autopilot, somebody cuts you off on the highway. Yeah, give them the one finger wave. Yeah, you just automatically, it's an emotion driven reaction to outside stimuli or whatever, or stressors, when in reality there's a fourth option, which I think is what you're talking. You call it awareness. I've heard other people refer to it as intentional living, and that you actually practice in your mind how you will respond in certain circumstances, so that that's your go-to response, not the knee-jerk emotional reaction. How does that work in what, how did you learn that? I mean, was it a spontaneous aha moment, or how did you come across that life-changing rewiring, and literally what does that look like?
Oh, so I came across it through Buddhism, to be honest. There's so many action items in the Buddhist world, and I learned it from a handful of teachers. And one of the Buddhist philosophies that they teach is that you are the witness of your thoughts, you are not your thoughts. And the first time I heard that, that was kind of mind blowing for me. I did have an aha moment, because I was like, wait a minute, I believe every thought that comes through my head. That is me. Where else would these thoughts be coming from if it wasn't from me? And when I was able to separate my identity from my thoughts, where I didn't just believe all those negative thoughts, 80% of my thoughts negative, like you said, I think that's a fairly accurate statement for the average person. Some people are even worse. But when you stop agreeing with those negative thoughts, you can then do something about it. You can take action. And here's something that's really cool that I learned along the way that really changed the way I thought as well, is that there is a switch in your brain that will produce cortisol or it'll produce oxytocin, which is the love drug. I call it the fear bucket or the love bucket. That switch is flipped based on the content of your thoughts. So Pat, that stat you just gave, where 80% are negative, that means 80% of the time the switch is being flipped over here to cortisol, and we're producing cortisol based off the content of our thoughts. 80% of those thoughts are negative, so 80% of the time we're walking around with cortisol pumping through our veins because that the negative thoughts, our body is in a fearful state, a state of alarm, like we don't feel safe when those negative thoughts are going. If you spend 10 minutes every morning doing a gratitude journal, the first 2 minutes are going to flip that switch over into the other side. And for the next 8 minutes, you're going to produce oxytocin. And oxytocin is going to make you feel drug-induced happy. You'll just be happy for no reason. And when I started this simple gratitude practice, it's so much more than that. It's so much more than a simple, I'm writing down what I'm grateful for. One, it brings your attention into the present moment, so you're not on autopilot anymore. And then two, it flips that switch in your head that starts producing oxytocin. And science has proven now, if you'll get into a state of gratitude for long enough and you produce enough oxytocin, after a certain amount of time, you get flooded with so much oxytocin, your body triggers other chemicals, aminoglobulin B, I think it is, that will actually search out any part of your body that's not healthy and heal it. And so science is proving now that we can actually heal our bodies by inducing enough oxytocin to do that. And how do you do that? You just simply have positive, loving, compassionate thoughts. And now all of a sudden it's putting you in that thing. But it's really hard to do that. You have to be aware to start to change these thoughts. You have to start changing the programs. There's a handful of other things that I do in the first 3 weeks of my program that I teach. And it's all manual stuff, right? What we're talking about right now, these are manual tools. It's not going back and healing anything from the past, but what it's doing is it's taking those thoughts that are coming in from an old program that's causing you to scan for fear all day long, every day, and it's muting that. It's basically saying, here's the manual tools to quiet that negative influence on your body.
Wow, Matt. I'm running out of space and ink, taking notes. Another way would trigger one of my guiding principles that you're sharing is whatever you're looking for, you'll always find more of it. Yes. And that is a fundamental principle and truth. Yep. I mess with people. When I say that to them and they're like, "Oh, I really don't believe that." I tell them, "Okay, well, here's what I want you to do for all next week. I want you to write down all the red Volkswagens that you see, and then when we get back together at the end of the week, I want you to report back to me how many red Volkswagens you saw." And they'll come back and they'll go, "I had no idea there were so many red Volkswagens in this town," because they were doing that intentional programming their mind of what are you looking for.
And that's amazing. Yeah, you are 100% right.
And it's like people will, like in law enforcement, we talk about muscle memory. With firearms, you want it to be automatic, draw, boom, and get that muscle memory going. what you're talking about is getting that muscle up here, if you will,
Yes.
your mind memory going. So besides like the journal, the gratitude journal, what are some other things that you learned to master as a concrete tool to get you to where you're at now with, hey, I want to live to be 200 years old?
So, another one, and it's liberating because, coming from a state of anxiety and depression, you just feel miserable all the time. So when you get brief gaps in that, it lets you know you're headed in the right direction. And another one that is used, in the Navy, the Navy SEALs anyway, in particular, but they teach them how to use breathing techniques. So when they get in a stressful situation, calm all the nerves down. So if the Navy SEALs are taught how to do this in a stressful situation, I think it's going to help us in a normal day where we're just dealing with our mind. And just box breathing, a simple box breathing for at least a minimum of 2 minutes, because it resets that same switch that I talked about earlier. 2 minutes of box breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold again for 4 seconds, and just go on a cycle. All right. When you do that, you're telling your entire system you're safe. All right. Your entire system, your shoulders will drop, your jaw will unclench. Your entire system is now being signaled there's no threat. Everything is calm. The cortisol is going to turn off, and your system's going to get relaxed, and you'll be in a calm state of mind. So when we get into a high pressure situation, what happens for a lot of folks is we trigger the reptilian brain. We go into the default mode network, and we go into panic mode, and we go into fight or flight. Well, in those situations, we go into what scientists call the default mode network. In the default mode network, we lose 60 to 40% of our brain power, right? So if you're only working on 60 or 40 to 60% of your brain capacity, as a Navy SEAL doing elite things, like, you're not going to be able to act. It's the same way in a boardroom or as a police officer when you're coming up to a call. If you're stressed and you're nervous, you're losing your brain power, right? So the goal is, if you're in a stressful situation, and I like to have people practice before they get into a stressful situation. So if you take my program, what I would do is I'd ask people to set 3 different alarms all day long. So like mid-morning, right after lunch, maybe like 2 o'clock or something, and then one time after you get home from your job. So I'll ask all parts of your day, and then the alarm goes off and it just says the time is now. All right. And so there is no problem here in the now. The problems are always when our brain time travels into the future or the past.
Yep.
So right here in this moment, there is no problem. So just breathe for 2 minutes, hold, exhale, hold, go through the box breathing, and it'll just calm you down. And then when we get into an elevated emotional state, chaos is going on. Maybe we're fighting with our spouse or whatever is going on in our world, where we're emotionally high and we're reacting like you were talking about earlier. That physical response that happens really quick when somebody cuts you off. If we can catch it before we respond or before we react, then we can start to breathe, and it'll take it back down to zero. If we react too quick, then it's already out. We may have made a mistake. We may have said something already. But even then, our brain's going to start to calm down, and we catch it and go, oh, wait a minute. I'm in an elevated state. I don't like this. I can start box breathing, and it'll calm me back down. And now I get all of my brain power back. I get 100% of my capacity back, and now I can operate at a higher level. Here's one thing that people will like, because everybody wants to make more money. They call this emotional intelligence in the business world, right? Somebody who could, in a high pressure situation, could keep their mind, level and make good decisions. And the average person, if you take anybody who's doing the same job, if somebody has emotional intelligence, they will make $25,000 more a year, more than their counterparts, because it's not because they're smarter than that person, but when the shit hits the fan, you can keep your wits about you and make decisions under high pressure. And that's really important in the world, but it helps at home. You know, we're not getting excited with our spouse, we're not getting excited with our kids, and we can respond versus have that involuntary reaction that's usually negative and harsh.
Yeah. Wow. And I know exactly. Some people call it combat breathing, in the box breathing, but I know for a fact, and I teach this across Colorado. I have, at least with law enforcement, is with neurodiverse individuals, so that they have intellectual or developmental disability, and they aren't wired the same neurologically that the quote unquote, normal person is what you're talking about. We teach cops that very thing, that when you are in a situation with a neurodiverse person and they're getting agitated, is you do that box breathing. They see it and they will mimic it because you're being calm, and
Yeah,
they want to be calm, and
yeah,
they literally will start mimicking exactly what you're doing.
yeah.
And the open stance and different things, that the calmer you are, the calmer they're going to be, and they're neurodiverse. Well, it even works even better with people who don't have an intellectual or developmental disability, that your kids will mimic
Yeah.
your and or do you ever, growing up, your parent, your mom or your dad would go, I don't like your attitude. And what they're really saying is they don't like your behavior, because they're
Mhm.
reading in your behavior what's going on up here, how you're thinking, and what your attitude, your settled way of thinking is. And if we could get our kids, if we work on teaching them to think differently, so they have better habits, better behaviors that they
Mhm.
repeat become their habits. And we do that every day without even knowing the science behind it or really thinking about it. But the reality is, like in talking with you, that when somebody is in that depressed condition, that they're either caught up in what the future might be, or regrets about the past or the bad things that happened in their life, and they're looking backwards instead of in the present, that everyday lessons teach us exactly what you're saying. So how do you, um, you say you have a 3-week program. What is that kind of? Can you give us what that structure looks like? So if there's
Sure.
listeners out there that are going, man, I need to hear this. What does that look like?
So it's actually a 10-week program, but the first 3 weeks are manual things. So you start to reprogram your your subconscious mind, really. Like you get the manual tools that you use and you practice, and it starts to get the system to calm down quickly, and you get familiar with the changing of your state, your physical state. You tell your system it's safe. It allows it to calm down, and the more you practice, it's like anything else. You just get better at it, and the system gets even calmer. It gets slower to auto react. Like when you talked about traffic, and I use the same thing in my program, because traffic is such a volatile place. Everybody's road tough guy, right?
Yeah.
Everybody could get a little tougher than they should be behind the wheel, because they're not going to actually have to talk to somebody. So when folks go through my program, I got the first 3 weeks that's full of manual tools, and at the end of it, people get so familiar with being in a positive state that now there's a contrast. Because right now, if you live like the stats you gave earlier, 80% of your day in a negative thought, well, you're living 80% of your day in a negative physical state with an alarm system going off in your body, because your body's being triggered by those negative thoughts. Cortisol's pumping at whatever level it is, depending on the intensity of those negative thoughts. So the goal is to start to shift it at least to 50-50, right? So now you have uh, something to compare it to, because in the past, if everything's negative all the time, you don't you don't really know what it feels like over here to feel positive. And so after the first 3 weeks, people get very hypersensitive to negativity in their environments. They've figured out how to calm themselves down in their head, but now all of a sudden, the negative guy at work, their mom or their spouse or their friends, they go into these environments, and people who are negative, talking in a negative way about people, just gossiping. Now all of a sudden, that's having a physical response, and we're like, whoa, wait a minute, this is hitting me a lot harder than it did last week. Because last week I was willing to jump in and I couldn't tell the difference, but this week I don't like this anymore. I can't deal with this now. I got to get away from this. So it causes people a bit of a difficult time. You have to have some very difficult conversations with a lot of people in your area, because if you've got a lot of negativity coming into you from your circle, you got to deal with it. Because if you don't, you will never maintain that positive balance, right? Because people will pull you into that negative thing just as quick as you can pull yourself out of it. And so that's the first 3 weeks is the manual tools. The next 2 weeks is some perspective shifts. You're an energetic being having a human experience, and the next one is you learn to love yourself. You know, we are all very good at helping others, but we don't treat ourselves the same way, right? And so we go through a few perspective changes. One of them that I really like is I basically try to have everybody imagine for a minute that you're your best friend. Whether it's your spouse or your son or your lifelong friend, and they're going to leave their body for 6 months, and you're going to live in their body, and you're going to live their life. When you look in the mirror, are you going to see beauty? If they've been wanting to lose weight for years, are you going to eat better and work out for them? If they've had a miserable job, would you try to find them another one? Or what would you do for your friend while he was gone? Or he or she was gone. And then you answer all these questions and about how you would treat them. And then the simple question is, so you would do all that for your best friend. Why are you not doing that stuff for yourself? And it helps people kind of have a perspective change while they're going through all this stuff out in the real world. And then we get into the hard stuff. We start removing identities. We learn how to forgive ourselves and others. And then the whole reason I wrote this program, you already talked about in the beginning, is going back to old negative core beliefs from our childhood, and some in our early adulthood, and actually rewriting those. Because all of those negative thoughts that we have, Pat, those are coming from those last 3 areas. They're coming from our identity. They're coming from our attachments to our identity, not being able to forgive ourselves and others, and the old negative core beliefs that were written a long time ago. And it's just a program that happened in the present moment, and it's still the present moment, and it's still, we're still scanning for those same threats today. So that's where a lot of the negative thoughts are coming from, and what triggers us in a lot of ways. And the second half of the program really addresses the root cause of the pain and that we're suffering from.
Well, Ed, I think it's so important what you're sharing there. The one thing that probably jumps out at most people is the whole forgiveness part of it, because the core principle we were taught growing up, you can forgive, but you can't forget.
Yeah.
And well, if I can't forget it, then am I in a catch-22 kind of experience, or it's like circular reasoning is, well, I just keep looping back to, well, I'd forgive you, but damn it, I'm mad. And then I just loop right back into that because I can't forget. So what is the realistic advice in that arena of, I understand that the human mind can't forget bad things or even good things that have happened to you, that I just don't think it's physiologically possible to wipe memories out unless you have a traumatic brain injury.
No, I agree with you.
And so what does forgiveness realistically look like in the rewiring that you're talking about?
So if to make this help you and the listeners, everybody understand this, better, when you're forgiving somebody, what you're doing is you're releasing yourself from a potential threat in the future. Because the way that the subconscious mind, there's a lot of things about the subconscious mind that are very mechanical. They're very action item. Like I understand how it works because 1 + 1 = 2. Like that's the subconscious mind is like a computer, and it's very deliberate about how it acts. And so to explain this, I really need to point out a few things about how it works. The first thing is the subconscious mind its number one job is to keep you alive. All right. So its only job in this whole world is to keep you safe and alive. That's why it breathes for us. It digests our food for us. It walks for us. It can drive home for us, and it does it really well. When we encounter something where somebody's harmed us in some kind of a way, and we get hurt emotionally most of the time. Like if we get physically hurt, that's one thing, but it's the emotional damage that we got that is troublesome. The emotional attachment to that moment is going to be programmed into the subconscious mind one of two ways. If it is a fearful event, the subconscious mind is going to hold on to it, and then it's going to use that and scan into the future to make sure that doesn't happen again. Right? So if that person's name gets brought up, it's now we're on high alert. It's the second that name, you could feel it. When you haven't forgiven somebody, you could feel it just by bringing their name up. You can talk about a situation and that person that burnt you, you have a physical response in your belly. That is your subconscious mind going, oh man, you better look out. Here it comes again, right? And so the way that we get past this is not to remove that memory, but to go back in time. Because here's another thing about the subconscious mind. It has no concept of time. It doesn't know the future from the past. Everything that has ever happened to us happened in the present moment. That could be a curse if you don't understand how it works, because however you were left feeling, that pain that you felt, your subconscious mind is going to try to protect you from that happening again from now until forever, because of the way that memory was stored. If it's a fearful memory, it gets held at a 9 out of 10. A loving memory comes down here at about a 1, because that loving memory is not going to keep you alive. That fearful one, now that one holds real stuff that's going to keep you alive and keep you, from somebody getting you, right? And so that's how we were designed. That's what we need to stay alive. But we've evolved past a lot of this stuff in the world. But as a whole, all right, so back to the time thing. The gift is that the subconscious has no concept of time. But if you put on top of that the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between a real or an imagined event. All right, so you get to take your conscious mind right now in this moment. And so I didn't learn, my big one that I had in my past that caused me so much pain was I didn't learn how to read till I was 25 years old, right? Past the 2nd grade level. When I went back and I figured all this out, I had to go back to when I was 5 years old and I was in kindergarten and I was trying to write my name. My name is Michael, and I couldn't spell Michael. My teacher started getting frustrated with me, and I could sense her frustration. And in that moment, I realized that all the other kids had already spelt their name, and I wasn't as smart as those other kids. Some of them were actually paying attention, and I was really embarrassed. And I got left in that moment when my emotions rise, that opens up the subconscious mind to program it. And then I got left with the clear intention that I wasn't as smart as everybody else. So from that moment on, I was basically programmed that I wasn't as smart as everybody else. And so from that moment on, I constantly scanned for, hey, I'm not smart enough. I'm not smart enough. I learned how to read when I was 25, but that program kept going. that program never got rewritten. Just because I learned how to read, it didn't do anything to the program. As far as I was concerned, from the program, I was still dumb. All right, I wasn't as smart as everybody else. And so the way to remove that memory and the way to forgive people, it's the same general premise, is to use my imagination, close my eyes, get in a place where I actually understand this process. And I've got a whole written process for people to go through this, where they work through it. But you go back and you're using your imagination to that moment with your little 5-year-old self, and you imagine that I'm sitting there with it. And now that I bring all my awareness and my understanding and my intelligence of the world today, I bring it back to that 5-year-old and I explain to them the whole situation, and I relive that entire moment. I get the emotion going, because if I don't get the emotion going, it won't rewrite the program. So I get that all going, and then I forgive the teacher, I forgive the students, and I forgive myself. And now that memory doesn't need to be held on to anymore. I'd reframe that entire situation with compassion, love, forgiveness. I'd take a lesson out of it, that this taught me things that are immeasurable in my life today, like all of the lessons that I learned because of this. Like, I reframe that whole thing with compassion, love, and forgiveness being the key part. And now that memory won't be held by the subconscious mind anymore. It will be released, and they won't haunt me anymore. I won't have any more thoughts telling me I'm dumb from that moment on. And it was the first time I did that, Pat, it was like taking a 20-pound sack, a sandbag off my back and throwing it on the ground. I just felt lighter, and I was able to move. And granted, there was a lot more from my childhood, because, teachers would call on to me to read, and I had a handful of, I probably had to do 20 to 30 on that one topic, because it was a repeated thing where I did get in elevated emotional states multiple times. But ultimately, that's how the subconscious mind works with forgiveness. When we go back to something and we forgive it, and we move it out of that fearful place where the subconscious mind no longer has to hold on to it, it'll let it go. Right? And then we just have to be conscious about that guy that causes us pain, because he did us so much pain, caused us so much pain. And just say, hey, I'm going to set a boundary in my life. That guy doesn't get to come back into my world, right? If that guy truly did something bad, and he doesn't need to be around you or your family, he used to be your best friend, and he did you dirty or something. Well, it doesn't mean you bring him back into your world. It just means you forgive him and release him from the pain that he caused. Release yourself from the pain that he caused.
Wow, man, I'm got like so many things going. It's
a lot.
Well, the reality, because I came out of law enforcement, I'm a former prosecutor, is in court, victims of certain crimes were allowed to give a victim statement to the court before sentencing of the offender. And and the ones that make the news are the victims that go in there and tell the court and tell the person that's standing right there or sitting right there in the same courtroom with them is, I forgive you. And that boggles the viewer's mind of, well, I could never do that. You killed my son, you raped my daughter, or me, whatever it is, is that is forgiveness is a foreign concept. And what you're saying is the reality is, if you don't go through this process of forgiveness, I'm going to come back to one other thing, then you are going to live under that cross and carrying it when you don't need to. That's one thing. And then the other thing, the analogy, and again, for law enforcement, those listeners out there will really grasp this, is in a officer-involved shooting. And something that I think is similar to what you're talking about in a way, but EMDR, and closing that loop, that you hit that moment of pulling the trigger and then your mind freezes and you haven't processed it as one continuous event. So, man, I'm like got all sorts of things written down here. One thing's because you talked about the Navy SEALs and the box breathing. Is there in your program and in your experience in the military, particularly special operations type people, they have a battle buddy. They never go solo unless they absolutely have to. Does that concept of a battle buddy, because because of the box breathing, the combat breathing, how does that battle buddy, or if you go Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a sponsor.
Yeah.
So what's that look like in your program?
So in my program, because you're right, you need somebody who understands what you're going through. Like if you don't have some type of support, so we try to offer either one-on-one coaching through the whole thing, so people could just talk through it. It's designed because, therapy can be expensive and not everybody can afford it, but it's designed for somebody to be able to go through it on their own. And then we have weekly coaching calls where everybody can come in and, kind of as a group. But if you don't have somebody to talk through some of this stuff, you can kind of get lost, and some of it's scary to do it on your own. So I definitely think that it's very valuable because at the end of the day, we have a 10-week program, and everybody who has ever taken it, their life is different at the end of 10 weeks. But it doesn't mean that their depression is gone. They've pretty much got a strong handle on anxiety. They can manage it very well. They don't need anxiety meds. But moving forward, if you stop doing all those things, all that stuff's going to come right back. So it took us years to build anxiety and depression, and really the depression causes the anxiety. But in order to get all that stuff gone, it takes a very long time. But to rewrite one core belief, you do it today, it takes about an hour and a half, and then you could do it again in about a week. Some people, rare few, can do it faster. Over time, you can do them faster, but it has a whole physical reaction to your body. And so over time, you need to continue to do them. So like for me, I had probably 30 on one topic, right? Being stupid. That's 30 weeks. I'm 8 months in to one topic, being steady with it every week. And so it's a long, drawn out process. You're not going to just remove everything out. If you had one traumatic instance, if you're able to muster the courage to look at it, face it, and forgive, and truly reframe that entire experience with compassion, love, and forgiveness, it could be gone in one experience. But a lot of people, they have trauma from childhood that's repeated. It's usually from their caregivers or somebody that is causing them a lot of pain. Now, that's going to take a very long time to get through, but when it's one instance, it's quick. So I want to be very clear about that process. But going back to your original question, you definitely need somebody who understands it, because you're going to see the world in a different perspective. And if you can't relate with somebody, you kind of get a feeling of isolation and feel like you're on an island.
Yeah. I liken it to what you're talking about, that time and patience aspect of the process. I worked human trafficking for a number of years and have one or two close friends who were trafficked, one of whom was trafficked from age 4 to age 17 by her grandfather within the church that she belonged to. And she's a survivor and is on the circuit. She's very involved. And she was the first person to share with me after I met her through a human trafficking related organization. She told us very bluntly that it's a 5-year process once you're out of the life So if somebody goes, "Oh yeah, I'm a survivor. How long you been out of the life?" Well, about 6 months. Okay, now she'll tell you that they're progressing, but it literally, to break all those things, those core things you're talking about, she goes literally, it takes you 5 years, and you cannot do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And and but their trauma was also repetitive,
Yeah.
as opposed to a single critical incident that it has is traumatic. That I think you were saying, people like an officer involved shooting. You know, I went
Yeah.
26 years sworn, and the only thing I ever shot was a target. You know, not and I was working in one of the most violent cities in the United States, but I never shot anybody. So I can't relate to an officer in that very personal way who has been involved in an officer involved shooting. Um, One of the things I know you talk about, and I mentioned it, you know, you're I think use the word fluffy. Um, but, that what you're talking about is not the traditional, because a lot of people, and especially cops or people who are in high risk um, uh, careers, first responders, firefighters, military, especially operators, different ER nurses, doctors, all that kind of stuff is I don't need to talk to anybody. Suck it up, Buttercup, and
Mhm.
I'll just put my nose to the grindstone and yeah, boom, boom, boom. If I want it done right, I'll do it myself. All those unhelpful, not healthy ways of e- embracing and working through your challenges. So, how do you talk to people that have that, uh, for lack of a better term, macho, um, mindset of I don't need to talk to anybody. Things will work themselves out.
Yeah. So it's a great point, and it's very common with men. Men commit suicide at 80, account for 80% of all suicides, but they account for they basically say they're 16% of all men are basically are affiliating with depression. 24% of all women are basically acknowledging that they're depressed. So men are reporting at 16%, but killing themselves four times more than women are. And men are not very good at opening up. And so what I like to do when I'm having these conversations with somebody who's clearly struggling but not wanting to admit it, because it goes back to the very beginning of our conversation when I asked you, when you were asking me about what it takes to get started on this process, and it's awareness. So if an officer is dealing with some type of trauma and he's not wanting to admit it, what I would ask him is about his life and say, hey, are there times in your life at home where you're snapping at people, involuntary reactions? Are you are you happy with the way that you're responding? Are in those moments are you having regrets? And try to bring awareness to either their actions if they're not willing to acknowledge their thoughts, but then try to get them to become aware of their thoughts, because the only way that anybody is ever going to make any real change is if they turn their focus inward,
Hmm.
right? That you're working on a patient and you are the patient. Like you have to, as a doctor, you have to be able to physically work on that patient, and we are that person, and nobody's going to come save us but ourselves. And so to help get people who are basically saying they don't need help, we need to get them to at least speak enough and bring awareness to it. Like there's one guy that he was in the Coast Guard and got kicked out because he was getting sick, and started a business, and he was struggling really bad in his business. But everything that I offered him, I could say all the stuff that we've talked about on here, and nothing was clicking. But what did start to click with him was when I basically told him that he's running his whole life on autopilot. Like, he's literally, everything you're doing is the same thing every day. You're reacting the same way. You're not even thinking about how you're reacting. You're just reacting. And what about taking a second to pause and respond to things versus just reacting? Well, he's like, well, I can't. It just happens. I said, well, that's the problem. Your reactions are the problem, because it's running off a program. The same way we walk, the same way we drive, we don't think about those things. We just react. And we need to get it to where we respond. But the only way we can respond is when we become aware of what is happening. So to trim up the answer to that question, if you're talking to somebody who's fighting it off and saying, no, just rub some dirt on it, get back in the game, I ain't dealing with this, they have to be willing, and they have to be willing to say, hey, I am suffering, I do need help, and then start turning their focus inward. Even if it's just to say, hey, I'm aware of these negative thoughts that won't shut up. I'm aware that I'm running on autopilot, because now all of a sudden they start to shift that from 5% to 8% of conscious awareness. And that starts to churn, and you start to make changes, because the only changes we ever make in our life are in that 5% of our days. Like, nothing else happens. Everything else is going to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And repetition, again, one of those core things that we've learned is repetition is the mother of all learning. The more something is repeated, even if it's not true, you're likely to remember it and possibly believe it. And I liken what you're saying. The intentionality part is, how'd you learn your ABCs? That stupid song. And you can do it. I mean, you can recite your ABCs. You're on autopilot, and you're probably, if you're listening right now, you're probably singing that stupid song in your head. But if I say now, so you know the alphabet, now cite it backwards.
Yeah.
And they can't, well, I can't do that. Well, sure you can. If you can cite it forwards, why can't you learn to cite it backwards? And it's a matter of perspective, like you said.
Yeah.
And training and repetition, and it just doesn't happen overnight. And for all our military folks out there listening, liken it to this, especially if you were a special operator, or if you graduated from any one of the military academies, you had to study Sun Tzu and the Art of War. And one of Sun Tzu's greatest principles was that for the best chance of success at change is for the person asking to change, they internalize the value of the change. That is that looking inwards. And sometimes, we get all upset. Oh, me. Well, there are some times when me it's going to save your life. And this is one of those times of internalizing the value of the change in your perspective about forgiveness, about how you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I can do it, I can do it by myself kind of deal. And Sun Tzu and the Art of War, that's how many centuries old is that? And you learned it in the military, but you aren't applying it in your life after the military. And the veteran suicide rate is the least, the last, and the lost. When that's how you see yourself, then you have no hope. And then that's when you will take drastic measures to end that pain. Man, we could go for hours talking about this. I know you and I, before we jumped on, that you wanted to make a special offer to any of the listeners download months from now, if you're just now listening to to the episode, kind of your gift to our audience. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, Pat. So basically what I want to give everybody is something that is going to help manually shift your perspective, to help give you something that could, some of the tools we talked about in the beginning, the manual tools to help you just change perspective, alter your state of being with an action. And so what I did is I'm giving everybody the first week of my program, and I am giving everybody 2 guided breathwork meditations that will alter your state. One's a grounding meditation, and another one is a pranayama exercise where you flood yourself with oxygen, and it makes you feel anxiety. It bubbles up all your anxiety for about 10 minutes, and then it's like flying a plane through the clouds. Poof, all of it's gone, and you can't, for the next 10, 20 minutes, you can't even have a negative thought. And it's one of the most amazing things that I've ever experienced in a meditation. And I want you guys to all have that, because it's just an amazing experience to be able to alter your state of mind without drugs or alcohol. It's an amazing thing. And, I just wish I had this when I was younger. I still use this all the time. I probably would have smoked a lot less weed in my 20s if I'd had this. But anyway, I want everybody to have that, and you can find it at mwoodmindset.com/servant. And we did this because you guys are listening to this podcast, and hopefully you guys can find some help if you need it through that.
Yeah, and that's awesome, and I'll put it in the notes, the podcast notes, and when we drop it, it'll be in the introduction. But again, it's M Wood, WOOD, mindset, all one word, .com/servant, and it's free. You don't have to do anything. Just go to that URL, and everything will be right there for you.
That's right.
Mike, thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation. And I'm going to have you back on because I want you to tell some of the success stories of the corporate world. That's nice. But okay, gals that are serving life sentences in prison have taken your 10-week program and changed their life, knowing they're not going to get out of prison.
Yes,
ideal. And so I'd love to hear some of those stories. So offline, we're going to schedule you to get you back on another episode to really just talk about those kinds of stories and why they happened, and how what we may think is so traumatic and dynamic in our life, I'll never get through it. Yeah, you're not serving a life sentence.
Yeah.
So we're going to get you back. Thank you so much for today. To our loyal listeners, we're in 43 countries as of this recording, on 6 continents. Thank you so much for being a loyal listener. Keep liking and commenting and sharing our episodes with people that need to hear these messages, because that's what warrior servants and leaders do. Follow us, obviously, warriorservantleaderpodcast.com. Reach out to me individually. You can get on my calendar, DM me, Pat Welsh JD on Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you want a good read, check out my 2 books on Amazon, Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Badge, and Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Cross. And as we close every episode, we're going to do it again because repetition, in a good way, is the mother of all learning. Is always, always, always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warriors, servants, and leaders do every day, every time. Love you all, and see you next week.